The following discussion is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered any kind of financial advice. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Jump Pod from the Unioverse, where we talk about all things Web3 and video gaming. My name is Chris Albrecht. I'm your host, and I am so excited. Okay, look, I'm going to be honest. We're doing a little bit of log rolling today. That's the term I've come to use. I've learned where we're going to talk about ourselves a little bit, and I think it's okay for us to do this. We'll try to make it as minimally patting ourselves on the back as possible, but we've got some exciting news, so I wanted to bring on the art director for the Unioverse Random Games, Ken Hall. Ken, welcome to the Jump Pod.
Thanks, Chris. Great to join you today.
Awesome. Hey, so here's why the reason we're talking today is because this week at the Unioverse, we're releasing our Unioverse viewer. Can you quickly describe what the Unioverse viewer is? Just top level. What does it do for people?
Absolutely. So as you know, that's the sort of the core of our NFT strategy are these heroes that we're building for our Unioverse. And gaining one of these heroes, it's going to unlock access to all the games in the Unioverse. So it's a really exciting proposition to collect these characters. But what makes the heroes so special is that every single one is unique. So we had to create a system that created all these unique heroes, and the viewer is our way to look at the collection and to see, the range of possibilities. Eventually in the full release of the viewer, we'll be able to see what our collection looks like, but we'll also be able to see what else is available in the Unioverse.
So I'm going to walk people through it just sort of kind of briefly, which is you go to unioverse.com. There's a subheading there called downloads. You download the viewer. There's an executable file, so it's PC only. Sorry, Mac users, myself included. And what you're able to do is right now we're starting off small, and it's starting off with our first hero, which is named Ryu, and he's this badass hunter for the space hunter, right? And he's really cool. But like you said, when you download the viewer, you can see thousands of different combinations of Ryu, right? Like you'll see commons, uncommons, epics, legendaries, right? And so
exactly,
you can see firsthand just all the work that's going into this. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that right away, which is, a lot of people who may or may not be familiar with NFTs, one thing they probably think about is just sort of a profile picture, a PFP of like a Bored Ape or something, right? Like a two-dimensional image. But what we're creating is actually like, you have a history in video games, right? Like
absolutely.
We're creating a character that you could drop into a video game. So for people who may not know, what does it take to make, these are like AAA quality video game characters. What does it take to make one of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, it's not just a single static image of this character. This is the actual fully ready to use, game ready avatar that we're talking about. So you're exactly right. You could drop this character into one of the into any application and that we have in the Unioverse and go ahead and play with it. So what you actually see is the character you'll be playing in these games. And that's what's sort of really exciting. But what goes into it, I mean, we had to create a system that could create literally hundreds of thousands of visually unique and technically unique, characters, these heroes. And so we had to create, as you say, a system that would allow us to create the 5 tiers of rarity that we've got at the moment and to make sure that each of those tiers stood out from each other. But then within each of those tiers, we wanted people to feel like that the avatar, the hero they owned, was actually truly visually unique and stood out from the next person in lines kind of thing. So creating a system that allowed us to change geometry, to change, textures, to change, emissive, which is the glows and the highlights on the characters and stuff like that, to change the behaviors of the characters, like eventually animations and weapons and things like that as well. So just the range of, possibilities is so vast. It's like every time I scroll through the viewer on our own end testing it, it's like, oh, there's one I love. And then, you skip through 3 or 4 more and it's like, no, this is the one I love. So I can't even choose which one I want at this stage.
Yeah, I should clarify. So when you download the viewer and you can view these, right, like you can kind of shuffle through them, but you can zoom, spin, pan, tilt, right? Like you can really get in and
you can see
all
every
the
little detail, every little bit of fur, every little bolt on the armor, every scratch, every dent. It's, you're going to see just how much love and care we put into these, because, depending on the application, we have to build these heroes in a way that they could be used in a third person adventure game, or a first person shooter, or a vehicle driving game or something. So at this stage, the possibilities are so open that we had to build something really flexible and really that catered for all these possibilities. So what you're seeing in the viewer is that the high resolution, beautiful, full figured hero that you're going to be playing in the games.
So I'm gonna press you a little bit further on this question again, because I want to make sure that everybody understands, right? Like, so actually, I want to take a step back, right? So there's the viewer part. There's thousands of creations, right? Like hundreds of thousands. Eventually, you'll be able to view. I think it's a couple thousand when we first launch a viewer, right? But you're actually going through and you're making each character as if to be built into a game. So can you tell people? I'm going to actually phrase this in kind of an anecdote. When I was early on, or a few months ago, on our Slack channel, somebody had posted a drawing of a character or somebody, and you had said, well, the anatomy is kind of weird because their neck is super thick, but the rest of the body is super thin. So how do you square that, right? And I want to get into sort of what it takes to design a AAA character. So given your background, like, what does it take to make a character like Ryu, or I think any of the other characters we're developing right now?
Well, so it starts, as with most things, with a great story, right? Like we talk to the writing team and find out, what's the purpose of this character? What's their background? Where do they come from? What do they do? Also to the gameplay team, what are their roles in the world? Are they a tank? Are they a fighter? Are they a healer? Are they a spellcaster? What's the kind of the archetype, behind this character? And so those factors go in and sort of drive a lot of the design behind it, because a lot of the form follows the function at that point. And then once we know what this character is, so in Ryu's case, as you say, he's this really badass Jadine hunter. And so it's like, okay, so now we know that, we know a bit about his background story. What does he look like? And then we start to craft the character. And so we want to create, in such a way that all five heroes that we're going to do in our first sort of, batch are they relate to each other. So they're all from the same universe, but they're all visually distinct and have their own characteristics. So it's that balancing off, making each one unique versus making sure that they all feel, in part of the same world space. And then once you do that, it's like, okay, so this is the visual of this character. We, that starts with our concept art team. We generate, thousands of concept images of this character and all sorts of different, potential, clothing options, armor options, different weapons, all that sort of stuff to get a feel for what the range of possibility is. But then we have to look at it technically and say, okay, this is in order to get the entropy, the possible variations that we need to generate hundreds of thousands of unique versions of this character, we're going to need this many items. We're going to need this many textures. We're going to need, this much, color space or emissive space to play with, all that sort of stuff. So then those technical things further, allow us to refine the design of the character and actually find out, okay, this is what it looks like, but we need to balance, how it's going to function and put all those things together. And then we have to figure out, okay, now how do we move it? Like if they've got hair, okay, you make sure that we've got a system that can accommodate moving the hair. If they've got cloth, likewise. If they've got 4 arms or 4 legs, it's like, okay, before we design that, we better make sure that technically that's something we're willing to accommodate. So it's pretty exciting. The characters that are coming down the pipeline, the heroes that we've got planned, the range that they cover is so broad, and it's just like with the Ryu, as you look through the viewer and keep finding new favorite ones, as we start to look through the other heroes too, I think people are gonna, have a hard time choosing between the individual heroes themselves as well.
So I want to ask you this. This is like a game development question, right? Like, so what do you think is sort of like a big misconception people might have about the way characters in video games are created?
I think a lot of times it's not understanding the amount of technical hurdles that you have to jump through, especially in a complex system like this. I also did design the customization system for APB, which was an MMO. And again, once you start to put thousands of characters, it's one thing to have a game that has a single lead character, but once they have thousands of characters that can come together, the parameters and the technical limitations just change and become so restrictive. So trying to navigate all those hurdles and still keep the quality bar up there is definitely one of the biggest challenges we have. So, a lot of people will look at a character from a single player game and compare that to an MMO character, and they're not comparing apples and oranges, but that's tough beans for us. We have to match the quality level set by these single player game characters because that's what people expect. So trying to do that in this sort of massively multiplayer world is really challenging for sure, but it's fun. And when you achieve that and you see these groups of these amazing characters standing together, it's so satisfying.
How did you get your start in video game and art direction?
So it's really funny. It's a funny story. I actually went over to the UK with a backpack and a tent and was going to sort of hike around. And I went looking for a job at one point, and I, wound up going for a graphic design job, expecting it to be like logo and letterhead type stuff. And, lo and behold, the company said, no, we make video games and we do 3D artwork. And of course, I'd gone through mechanical engineering and then fine arts at university. And everybody said, what are you going to do with those two courses? Well, you couldn't have had a better combination. I'd done a lot of 3D work with AutoCAD and stuff like that from engineering and stuff. So, I was able to, they dropped a manual on my desk and said, here, if you can do something in 3 days that impresses us, you can get a job. You can have a job. And lo and behold, it was the early iteration of 3D Studio. It was revision 2, I think, in the old days. And it was made by the same people that made Autodesk. So the interface was somewhat familiar and the process was pretty familiar. So in 3 days, I built one of the turrets from Empire Strikes Back and the Planet Hoth. And it was obviously good enough that they gave me a job. And that's how I got into games. It's awesome. Back in 94.
Oh, we're old.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have said the year. Shh.
No. Wear it like a badge of honor. Because I'm right there with you.
We started off making like the 8-color games, right? And of course now it's like, photorealistic stuff. It's awesome.
So tell me a little bit about that then. Like, because you've evolved, right? So 1994, that's right before the Nintendo 64, right? Like,
yep. Sega Mega Drive was the first platform I worked on. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, you have way different constraints. So as it's evolved, how has your job evolved?
It's really interesting. I mean, obviously the process is very similar. I mean, the biggest change was when we went from 2D to 3D, obviously. We were anti-aliasing pixels in D-Paint for years, trying to get that perfectly beautiful image. And, when it went to 3D, that was a huge leap. And luckily, like I say, for myself, that was something that I was already exploring and dabbling with, so it was a fairly natural transition at the time, which was great. But since then, it's really just been a case of increasing the quality. I mean, a lot of the things that we used to have to do, and even think back to the motion capture days and rebuilding the data and the skeleton and stuff like that, and certainly with the 3D side, having to be really careful and efficient with the polygon counts and things. That is changing rapidly now. It's in some ways I like to say it's easier because the technology is making it less important to be efficient, but at the same point, the scale of what we're trying to do as we get into these sort of MMOs for starters, and then later the metaverses, and we want to put thousands of people together, that's bringing back all that same sort of technical constraint. Now we have to pack efficiently because we want to put thousands of these characters. The power machines may be tens of thousands of times more powerful, but when we multiply our resource needs up, we're in the same place we were. So a lot of those same skills of being efficient and understanding, how the technology is working to be able to navigate some of these constraints is still just as useful as it ever was. So in some ways, it's like the more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Yeah. I mean, you fill up whatever space you have, right?
Well, there's always that. Exactly.
So I want to ask you, So one of the things we're doing at the Unioverse is creating characters that, like you said, could be slipped into anything. They could be in a first-person shooter. They could be in a League of Legends style game. They could be in the cockpit of a kart racer, right? Like it could be anything, right? Depending on how the developer uses it, right? So how are you designing characters? I imagine that there are some constraints, right? Like it seems everybody seems to be bipedal so far, right? Like there is hamster in Overwatch, right? It's a ball rolling around, or like a quadruped that would take up. It just, if you think and I'm not an expert at this, right? But I think like, that would take up a certain amount of space. That would then the ripple effects outward would be like you'd have to make walls this tall, or you know what I mean? Like, what are the things you have to think about as you're doing this?
That's definitely, part of it for sure. The locomotion method and things like that. So you're right. This first batch of heroes that we're designing are all bipedal. There is some differences, beyond that with the characters, but things like scaling, we have to take that into account. What's the height range difference? What's our shortest character versus our tallest character, and things like that. And that's something we're doing in this first batch because we want it to be, kind of really ubiquitous in terms of, we want it to be sort of one size fits all for the initial phase of the project. But the vision is definitely to create those edge cases as we get more heroes. Like once you have 50 heroes, we can afford to have a really short hero, or a really tall hero, a really wide hero, or a hero that does roll around like Sonic the Hedgehog or something. I mean, it's definitely something that we see doing later on. It's just that if we did something and it precluded a certain type of gameplay because that character didn't fit into those tunnels that this game was using or something like that, then it would be difficult if it was one of 5, initial heroes that we're creating. But as we go further along, we definitely see that there will be some more unique and more interesting ones that we can collect as well.
It's just something that I think is super interesting, because our goal is to make all of those characters like AAA quality characters and to create a variety. But I imagine that, as you're doing that, creating these NFTs for people to view, that those are all things that you have to sort of keep in mind.
And even with the sort of the simple range of characters that we've got right now, where there aren't massive differences between them in terms of height or anything like that, we still want them to move slightly differently, to feel slightly different as they're navigating the environment. Are they big and heavy? Are they, nimble and lithe, or, that kind of thing? And are they moving stealthily? Are they moving kind of, with a lot of confidence and swagger, that kind of thing. So we want to tell a story with each character, the way they interact in the environment too. So even with this initial set, there's enough differences to create a lot of work for ourselves. So, we want to make sure that we balance off, sort of our desire to create something that's stunning and impressive with, making sure we can actually, achieve it in the first case.
There are a couple of things I want to circle back to here real quick, which is sometimes I think people just take for granted anymore, especially today. I mean, you and I grew up playing Nintendos and Super Nintendos, right? So, or even further back, the Superman of Atari 2600, which was just 8 blocks.
ColecoVision.
Right? And yeah, all that stuff. Xevious. What are the things that you pay attention to when you're creating a character? Because one of the things you mentioned before was like texture, so like fabric versus armor. Yeah, but then there are things like lighting and reflection and skin types, right? Like, is it scaly or furry? What are some of just the details that you have to dig into, because it's the kind of thing that people notice?
I think those are all great examples, and you're right. It's all about sort of just trying to create this cohesive whole. So making sure that whatever this character's story is, whoever they are, that every aspect of that character reflects that, that sort of background. So from the way they move to the way they carry themselves to the way their garments, are applied, but even little details like, what do their eyes look like? What shape is their tongue? I mean, Ryu is there's this great hunter. We didn't want him to have, like, it initially came back, modeled with a regular human shaped tongue. No, he can't have a human shaped tongue. He's got to have this kind of Gene Simmons long pointed tongue that really was scary and kind of alien-esque. And it's like, so yeah, I mean, little details like that, even the shapes of the teeth. I mean, it's amazing, the way we split hairs quite literally sometimes, as we're designing these characters to make sure that, yeah, obviously, Krish is a human character. So there's a character where there isn't as much room to really push the boat out anatomically, because, this is something that we all need to be able to relate to as a human. So much of that comes down to the expression and some of the details, like, different makeups and tattoos and ornamentation and things like that. Because, a human's a human. We've all seen a human, but now we have to sort of make all these hundreds of thousands of variations of this human, but keep it the same person. It's not like we can have 100,000 people and change the eye shape and the nose shape, and that's easy. But this is one person, one character, but we need 100,000 variations of them. And it's like, okay, how do we do that? So that's kind of some of the exciting problems we get into.
I imagine it's almost easier to create. So in the world of NFTs, right? Like, I imagine because you are paying attention on such a minute, detailed level, that you're then able to mix things up. You have more pieces to play with, right? Because it's not a flat 2D image where, you have the same basic shape and maybe they're holding a cigar, or, you know what I mean? Like, you can really get into, like, the armor is this, and there are different sets of armor, and then there's a faceplate or not a faceplate or hair, right? Like, it seems like that frees you up almost to create more variations.
It does. I mean, you can do that stuff in the 2-dimensional artwork as well, but it's maybe less effective than in an environment where you can actually pan around the character, and the addition of a shoulder pad really makes a massive difference when you're spinning around the character and it's affecting the silhouette in all these different angles, as opposed to if all the characters are in the same plane and you're just seeing, kind of the silhouettes broken up by these objects, but it's the same silhouette, all the time, basically. Then it is more of a challenge. So I think that in some ways the fact that we're in this live 3D environment does help us with that.
So let me ask you this before we go. Like, I imagine there are people listening who are probably interested in getting into sort of the art game in the video game world. What advice do you have for people just starting out who want to get into designing characters and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So the first thing is, basic art training, whether it's taking art at school, whether it's taking art classes at your community college or wherever you can access them, whether it's taking a degree in fine arts, whatever works for you. There's no requirement on a specific level of education. It's just getting, even the online YouTube courses and stuff like that are fantastic nowadays. So first and foremost, you've got to have the basics, composition, color theory, all those kinds of things, and really understand, the basic principles of artwork. But beyond that, it's just, playing a lot of games is massively useful, because, the more you play, the more you experience different ways of doing things, and you can bring all those ideas to the table rather than just sort of pigeonholing down a certain category of game or something like that. And then the key is, just be prepared to get in whatever way it takes. Like, a lot of times people will start their careers making props, so they get to make boxes. I was making, mines in Waterworld on the Sega Mega Drive, ocean going mines. That was my first foray into the industry. So, you start at the bottom as always, and you just, try to experience as much as you can and learn from the people around you. And one of my favorite things about the games industry is how amazing the community is, right? Most of the people in the industry are so supportive and so willing to kind of take people under their wing and teach them, and that it's just a great experience to be part of. So, game jams, local game jams and things are a great place to start to meet people and to try things out and to get an idea for what, it takes to make a game. Those are all great places to start.
Excellent. Ken Hall, this has been a tremendous a chat. Thank you so much for doing it. Everybody go out, download the Unioverse viewer, see the thousands, because you're doing those all by hand, right? Each one of the 1,000 you're going in by hand and recreating it. Is that right?
There are a few that are curated, but the majority are procedurally created. So yeah, exactly. We're not creating 100,000 different avatars, precisely by hand, but we create the formulas that create them, and yeah, it's exciting to see the results. And as you say, we're gonna see 10% of our Genesis drop in the viewer at the first stage, and then we'll just keep adding more and more as it goes along. So a good range for people to experience anyway.
Yeah, excellent. Ken Hall, art director for the Unioverse. Thank you so much for being on the Jump Pod. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. It was my pleasure.